So you've always been just a little bit different from the people around you. For as long as you can remember, you've had to navigate the accusatory stares of your peers that don't seem to have the flexibility to accept the reality of a world that isn't easily defined. And that's because you're drifting between worlds, enfolded in a space where the lines between here and there are blurred beyond recognition. How do you find a way to open yourself up to the healing wisdom of your heart when you're vulnerable to parties seeking to consume your light and make it their own? We're speaking today with Courtney Keyser, a mother and innately gifted dreamer that's been exploring the effects of systemic trauma on herself and her children. A bit of a warning. We'll be discussing instances of sexual abuse, substance abuse, and physical violence.
Recently, when the request is made around spiritual and emotional research to hear about the experiences from BIPOC communities, that there's a leaning towards the indigenous piece of BIPOC, that acronym, and sometimes a passing over or less emphasis placed upon the experience of Black women. So thank you so much for just joining and lending your voice to it. So all I really wanted to just get us started, because it doesn't take a lot when we start jumping off into discussion, is that so let me start with an intention, because I think that always helps to guide the discussion, is that while I think it is an amazing and a great thing for us to lend the experience of women of color to a field that may not hear as much from us, that I think more so it's important for us to support and share experiences with each other and other women who may not have that resource or have that sisterhood, be able to make that connection. So I feel like this discussion that we're about to have is more so for other women like us, and less of us trying to just give to a field or a teaching or a community that doesn't have our voice. It's more so medicine for the virtual community of women of color. So thank you for that. So I just kind of wanted to start with just giving you the floor to talk a bit about what, if you could share a little bit a beginning kernel of what has led to you finding your spiritual practice, or just what's spiritual or emotional practice. I use the word spirit and emotion interchangeably, and not to have spirit instantly equate to a religious practice, but it's more so your spiritual and your energetic experience. What took you from, I guess, if you could share a little bit of like the space of where it was that you are into where you are now. What was the story? How did your story start there?
I have always been, I guess, what you would call gifted in some capacity. I've never not had something else going on. Whether it was reading people's energy and fully understanding what they weren't physically expressing, whether it was on the more salacious end, thinking that I had imaginary friends for most of my life, and then finding out later, looking at family albums and other things, that they were not imaginary. Whether it was lucid dreaming and really being able to manipulate my dreams, and also do that in waking life through what they call manifestation. Whether it was even understanding or recalling things before they happened or as they were happening. And I feel that my saving grace has always been that I had a mother that, regardless of what I came to her with, she always listened, and she was on the end of believing me before just dismissing what I had to say. that she didn't leave any stone unturned, even if it kind of went against the religious things that she was brought up with or taught, how they view discernment and sight and what it is to be used for and not used for. But I had the blessing of having a mother that never questioned and always supported and was one to listen first. And even if she didn't have the tools to assist me through something, I was never made to feel from my direct source shame around that. Shame came from the rest of the world. Shame came from family members that I also knew were gifted. But, two things could be true at the same time. They struggle with mental health, but they're also gifted. So a lot of things that they would say didn't necessarily have value or were legitimized So I went through a lot of going through a lot of crazy stuff and being validated. I went through a lot of, my father was an empath and we were able to relate on that front, but he did not have tools to deal with that. He had no support. He had no protection. It left him open to a lot of stuff. So on that front, we were able to communicate. But we both kind of ran away from our gifts in the same way, but differently, how it manifested. I really just came to a point where, in becoming pregnant, I'm
feels like a thunderclap.
Yeah, I could go through the usual tropes of me trying to figure this gift out. I watched every TV show you could watch with scientists and their backstories of how their childhoods were and what age of stuff started to peak and valley and come up for them. And I did everything everybody else did. And my friends who dabbled in different forms of religion and spiritual practice. And what really became the non-negotiable for me is the pandemic. Being an empath during the pandemic, as I'm sure any other empath knows, was rough. And then on top of that, I was a person in customer service for a company that preached about and stood and believed in community and being present for others and listening to them, and then leading a team of 40 young people, all in transition, and then being a pregnant Black woman on top of it, on top of what was going on in America at the time, and watching Black women be so undervalued and so disrespected. And then also in that space, realizing how much my value plummeted as a pregnant Black woman, how it plummeted in my corporate life and working, how disrespected I was just on a regular basis by my community and customer base. Even the expectations of the people that I led, and even in my own household, because our pregnancy experiences are different, but most of the women in my life and my family that I could speak to, they all had some kind of story of outside of their community or dealing with the rest of the world, how they were not protected as a Black pregnant woman and how extra vulnerable you are in that state. So I just came to a point where I'm like, my mental health is in the tank. I am being bombarded by people who so desperately need or want to use my light source and my ear and my guidance. I have my wonderful husband who's also experiencing this stuff as a Black man. And how can I necessarily there's a disconnect there. And my mother, her pregnancy experience was just so traumatic that there were not points of connection or care that you kind of expect from your female community. You expect that your aunties and there's just a certain care that you get to see other people experience that is not necessarily there given our trauma, our shared trauma. So for me, it was just everything happening at the same time and not feeling an out because I'm getting all of these messages and absorbing all of these feelings. And even though Pregnancy can be a beautiful thing for a pregnant person. You also have a parasite within you that is draining your life source, that is tapping.
Thank you.
I love you. I love my baby. I would not trade her for anything in the world, but like, this is the truth. That's tapping your life source that that is making you acutely aware of all the things imprinted in you, all of your pain, all of the baggage that you're still dragging. And then also acutely knowing, like, I'm gonna say it because it needs to be said.
Do it.
I cried when I learned that I was gonna have a baby girl, and not from joy. I grieved. And this is before the stuff that just came down the pipeline. I grieved because I'm like, gosh, I gotta, I have to do this momentous thing of teaching her how to exist and be present in her body and assume her space and not dim her light. And I can't find mine right now. And so during that time, I completely understood that I had to undergo this journey, but knew that I physically could not until at least she got here. The circumstances of my life didn't lend to it. And I knew that I would not have a choice. And it was just a blessing of the universe that Divine by Design is there, and we did the dream workshop, and it was all fortuitous that this stuff was coming all at the same time, and also me seeking, my husband and I were in counseling, but me finally being like, nope. One of the foundations of my life is that I decided that I'm going to be a curse breaker. We're breaking generational curses. There are things that I will not allow to go past me.
You're giving me shivers.
It's what connects. It's what connects me and my husband together. And I said, with this generation, like, what I'm suffering from is that I don't have the how. I've got most of the why because I've been one of the few unafraid to ask hard questions. I got the why because I'm connected to my ancestors and they communicate through me. I've got the bits that have been taken from my life experience that helped me kind of manage my mental health, and it's not working anymore, so I need a professional. And through all of those things coming together, I finally just made a decision for me and said, I'm not going to have my gifts hijacked anymore. My intellectual property belongs to me. I am going to learn how to use this gift to let it work through me, and also make sure that I am protected, and that the things that my ancestors have already worked through, I'm not carrying that baggage anymore, and I'm leaving as little as possible for my daughter to address that's coming down from us to her. She's just got to work through whatever is coming for her. And I said, you know, I've been selling myself short and supporting so many others. I'm going to do it for me. And realizing that the answers are really right there in front of us. And it's us removing our judgment and removing the care and judgment of others to just be authentic with ourselves. Which is saying a lot, and it ain't easy to do, and it's a constant thing. The work doesn't stop, and it's radical acceptance of, if I don't make these things right and whole and understand it, I'm dooming myself to repeat this lesson. And there are people watching me, even if you don't have children, if you have siblings, if you have younger cousins, if you have older people, they usually will follow lead once the mantle's been passed. But somebody has to do it. Somebody has to be able to see it to know that it's achievable. And if you're not seeing that, and if people aren't being vulnerable and sharing their truths on how they got through stuff and what that really was like, not the pretty stuff, but the icky stuff, it's going to continue to be the way that it is.
Courtney, let me take a breath. Because there's so much. Okay. First off, gratitude, first and foremost, like serious heart space, empath coming right back at you with the gratitude, like from my center space, because a lot, the journey that you have shared, that you have undertaken, everything from what you shared about having that connection to your father and understanding that a lot of the struggle for maybe the generation that's immediately before our generation was them having the gifts, having the experiences, and not really having the tools to address it, not being equipped with the tools to address a lot of that. And what your journey is one that I have seen mirrored in so many people of color right now. That idea, and it was something that Divine by Design in our very first fireside chat, we spoke about the idea of the pandemic creating an opportunity that hadn't existed there for so many people. And it was such a strange way to talk about the pandemic, because when a lot of people discussed it, it was, this is a horrible thing. Let's get on the other side of it. I really want to be able to go back, to the bar, where I really want to be able to get everything happening just the way it was before. And for so many people of color that I spoke to, there was, on one hand, this opportunity to pause from leaving your own home space and going out into the world and constantly being bombarded. There was that stillness of being able to some extent, even if you couldn't disengage from having to physically go to work, to understand that so many other aspects and elements of the world seemed to slow down a bit, and that you were given that space of, hey, this is something that you can't ignore. This is actually something that you need to make a move on. And that having the courage to lean into what spiritually and emotionally is being called forth to be addressed is actually a blessing and an opportunity that a lot of people of color have started to step into. And it was a very difficult thing to try to explain that when it's not necessarily a part of just the American culture. I mean, I'll stick to America. Yeah. I think it's broader than America. I think it's a Eurocentric type of viewpoint. Yeah. But just looking at North America, that idea that you don't really open up about dreams and spirituality and what it is you might be going through emotionally, or if you do it, it's in this, like you said, there's elements of shame, there's elements of vulnerability that you really don't want to show to the next person. But during the pandemic, there was that need to connect with people on more levels than you had maybe previously. You were I saw people opening up and taking that opportunity to start having conversations that, for whatever reason, they didn't give themselves a time and space to have before. And when you said that you wept about finding out that you had a daughter, I wept the same way when I found out I had a son, that I was going to have a son when I was pregnant. It was not necessarily tears of joy, but it had me face a lot of the questions that I knew I would have to start addressing, so that when he came forth into the world, it wouldn't also be my baggage that he was handling. I guess I want to ask you a question about, because you mentioned so many pieces. Just starting back, are you from Baltimore? You mentioned that this was are your people originally from Baltimore? Like, what's the story of your family?
My people are by way of the Carolinas.
Okay.
And they came up from the Carolinas and did not leave it behind. But I am born and bred in Baltimore. And the funny thing about my family dynamic on both sides is that there are tales, there's legacy of people being gifted in some form or fashion. All of their gifts have been different. Wow. The ones who have been most gifted, we did, given systematic racism, we didn't have access to good healthcare, mental health care. Nobody really did for a certain period of time. But anyway, they were kind of, they become anecdotal stories, and their pain becomes anecdotal stories. And some of the things that some of their power becomes diminished because of the times that we're living in, or the lack of the understanding of the people around them. But there were elements of my family, deeply religious on both sides, and elements of my family that hung true and still held on to the medicine of like understanding what certain fruits and vegetables and plants do, and certain care that needs to be taken during the pregnancy and child rearing process, and certain things that my family members, just their habits that you don't realize are rooted in connecting and supporting your body and your spiritual health, of like the certain baths that you would take and when and how, and just different things that the importance wasn't always expressed, and that those things are actually the how of what you should be doing now, and that disconnect there. And so I've always had gifted people in my family, and I'm unique because my memory goes back very far. I remember being an infant looking at my grandmother.
Oh, wow.
And even my grandmother always jokes now that I did not like her. It wasn't that I didn't like. It wasn't that I didn't like my grandmother. It's just that my grandmother has issues with boundaries, and I even understood that as a baby. And I think it's funny, like full circle, like she took care of me, and I'm helping to take care of her now. Or my great grandmother, like, you know, they have the tales of like she always knew who was pregnant, like dreaming of fishes and stuff, and she was one of the lucky ones that knew lottery numbers and things like that. So like,
wow.
But it's always kind of been there in varying degrees of like support or disgust or just confusion around it. And I think my story is particularly unique because my mother had 3 miscarriages before she had me.
I'm sorry.
And I, in turn, had 3 miscarriages before I had my daughter.
Wow.
And the third time, we both said, not this one. Whatever hell or high water, she will get here. And I was born in the 3rd month on the 30th day.
Wow.
So there's always been a power within the women in my family, and all of them have stories of things that they were told, and they were truly in their power when they were like, no.
Yeah.
And I think the shift happening now for a long time, and this is something I've really been thinking about, because I have the luxury and the privilege of living now and having a life to support going on this type of journey. I have a supportive partner, I have a support system, but it's very, very difficult if you're navigating this alone and you don't have someone to be able to step up for you and pick up slack for you to actually fend and care for yourself. And I realized too, in no judgment of my ancestors, that they had to survive, and already being viewed a certain way, our bodies for what they can do and what they can be used for, and the fear around what our bodies and our minds can be used for by non-POC and the people in power at the time. There was not space really for you to be outward or public about what you could or could not do, because that could be a death sentence. That could be twisted and manipulated and used as it was
so
exploited. So I also understand that certain things couldn't be addressed or had to be bypassed. And the difference that I want to make is how we go about addressing it, that it doesn't fall into the hands of addiction, that it doesn't fall into the hands of self-harm, that it doesn't fall into the patterns of harming others and abuse. That is what stops, and that we go, okay, 2 things can be true at the same time. I can be depressed, and I can also be highly gifted. And all of those things come together can make a perfect storm of trouble. But that's really where it's been for me, of understanding, okay, they've already paid the price of having to hide or having to love at a distance or having to code switch or to deal with blatant systematic racism. And now to honor my ancestors and myself, I have to radically accept their pain and understand that it informed how I was raised and the decisions that I have made thus far. But how I end that is that I don't continue that. I take that knowledge and move us forward. I share the knowledge. A small example of that in people dealing with their trauma and their giftedness all at the same time. My mother made sure very young that I understood that addiction ran heavy on both sides of my family, and it manifested in food addiction, alcohol, drugs, sex, like all of it. Whatever you can get addicted to, it's been done. But she made sure that I knew that we were predisposed to that so I could make different decisions. So it takes being vulnerable and accepting the fact that, your funny uncle with the great stories is funny, but he's a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
And you need to understand that. And you also need to give him grace and maybe look at him differently and find out if he's willing to share or through context clues, why is he that way? And how do I continue to perpetuate his state now?
Yeah.
In my learned understanding of him.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer.
I was about to get the question I was about to pop off was how have you learned to honor who you are and where you are? Because, and I think you just did that, because that when you mentioned like finding the how, there's definitely an element of us connecting with and honoring our ancestors, but then what is also the work to be done is being completely present with who we are and where we are right now. Like you said, we have it's the responsibility, but also the privilege of being the living generation now, of being those who are actually undergoing the experience and the blessing of life right now. And to be present exactly where you are as a work in progress. That's not necessarily at the destination that you might want to be at, but at the same time has that connection to the past. Is it, and maybe it's something that you can talk a little more about how it might have shown up in the relationship. So what you're making me think of is the relationship between where you are, the connection with your mother and past generations of women, and then what you see when you look forward and you make that connection with your daughter as a future generation. That idea of being someone who is gifted, being able to connect with the past of those who are gifted, understanding when you talk about, for example, the nature of addiction, knowing the predisposition that your family has to get tied up in that, and how you navigate understanding where you are right now, what you need to do for yourself now, and then how to translate that into the gift and the responsibility of being a mother and looking forward to future generations, with the understanding that there's plenty in the future that is not yours to own, be responsible for. You know what I mean? Like that idea that there is what comes after you that is not yours to own, but because you are the living, you know what I mean? Like a representative of your line, the responsibility and the action and the gift and the blessing falls to you right now. How do you reconcile that connect, that you being a living link between what has gone before and what comes next? There's a ton of questions, but I think I'm asking the same question like 4 times.
No, I got you. And I'm gonna get real personal. And I'm glad that I've been working through this. I am a child sexual abuse survivor. My gift allowed me to understand and know when and how I was going to be abused. The initial start of the abuse that I underwent was a result of my father's addiction. My father was an incredible father. Like, it's what made the transition into the depths of his addiction so devastating. Daddy's girl all day. But at that point in time, he was in a space where he was, heavily in the third throes of it and still trying to hide it and mask and function. But he was at the point where he would just leave me with people. When he couldn't get the village, I was left in other circumstances. And my father did not know any of this up until the day he died. We worked that out post his passing, but I never shared this with him because I also understood that I would never see my father again, that either he would be in jail for murder for the rest of his life, or I understood the age, but I was 4 when I was first molested. And the circumstances that led up to that is that my dad dropped me off with a person. They did not molest me, another person in the home did. And I had dreamt about it about a month before it happened. And it actually happened in the way that I dreamt. And so for me, in that moment, it tied my gift to trauma.
Yes.
And how people and children internalize things, it's your fault. And then how adults in those situations manipulate you. It's not just the physical act. It's all of the emotional and mental trauma and hijacking that goes along with that. And so that right there led to a perfect set of circumstances that repeatedly later in life, I continued to experience situations where I was exploited, or I did not have autonomy of my body. And that then playing directly into you were a pregnant Black woman. And seeing someone like Breonna Taylor be in her home peacefully sleeping and still doesn't have autonomy of her body in her home. And the other things that happen, right? So here you go. You have a through line right there. Like my father's addiction, which stems from the things that he went through, which stems from him having an incredibly chronic degenerative disease that he did not have a diagnosis for yet or understanding of at the time. And you don't have that information. And you make bad choices and you get in too deep. And then that leads to that trauma being passed on to someone else. Right? So I had to embrace being re-traumatized and then breaking myself from that. So my father, unfortunately, he got clean, and it was clean for a very long time. And he had ankylosing spondylitis, which is like an extreme form of arthritis. And what it does is that it eventually converts soft tissue, cartilage, muscles into bone. So he could not turn his head. Like he was fusing together. By the time that he was towards the end of his life, my dad was mostly steel. And I used to call him the $6 million man. He hated it, but I called him the bionic man. And when he passed, unfortunately, he had relapsed. He had experienced a lot of loss. And he was caught up in 2017. There were a lot of people who were caught up in the fentanyl overdoses. And his case was one that was included in someone who did actually end up facing charges, but he was gone like that. And the one thing that me and my sister, it's okay. It's really okay. He's not in pain anymore. Like, I'm sitting on the other side of like, my dad has done more for me on the other side than he was able to do in life. We have a wonderful relationship now. But for my sister and I, we had reconciled so many times his death because my dad had died several times before he actually died. So we never expected that death to be tied to the thing that stripped him from us, right? So that was its own thing. So I say all that to say that in order for me to get to the how, I had to own the fact and be open about my pain and trauma and the things that I've been through, that I have to openly grieve it, even in your situation where charges can't be pressed or you don't want to go down that road. I honor my ancestors. I honor little Courtney, who is an ancestor who's also living at the same time. I honor them by honoring their story and knowing that their pain and their sacrifice and the prices that they paid are not justification for me to give up, for me to wallow. It just makes the story, the journey, that much more greater. So in radically accepting my father and his addiction and his pain and all of him that lives in me, that gives me my gifts, that can make me short-tempered, that can make me super creative, but also short-visioned, and I have to multitask. All of those things are wonderful. Yeah. And I have to accept that, and that the same thing lies in me, that through a different set of choices, I could be him. Yeah. But it still is okay. Yeah. It's still okay. It still makes all the other things beautiful. Understanding the amount of pain that my father was in and the impact that he had on the world around him, even if someone was just to label him and extrapolate his story to just say he was a junkie. He was far, far, far more than that. He is still living within me when I look at myself every day. Yeah. I honor little Courtney, whose unfortunate traumatic experiences are imprinted deep within me. And whether or not I stood up and embraced and addressed them, my daughter would have things that she has an emotional response to that she won't understand because they go that deeply with past to her. So in little ways where I saw myself already course correcting of being so staunch and like her body is her body and I need her to understand her space and or questioning the motivations of other people in my life who want to be close to her. And like I could fall into the pitfalls of the PTSD I have from being abused, from not trusting others. And so it forces me to confront that so I can check myself and say, is this grounded in reality? Am I present? I've been through this before. So why am I worst case scenarioing it down? I know I have been through this and ancestors have been through this and we can survive it. Yeah. We need to know how to live through it now. Yeah. And that requires honoring that and how many traumatic things I have just walked through in my life because of the expectations of women and Black women specifically of how we are to show up and how we are to carry things. And I never sat down and cried over the fact that I was violated as a 4-year-old child and then violated again and then violated again and violated again and then allowed violation of myself because that's what I learned. Yeah. I have to grieve that. And there's nobody's timestamp on when that's supposed to be over. I need to cry all those tears I didn't cry so I can get to a place where I now can tell you the story that I would not have been able to tell you a year ago. I wouldn't have even been able to get the words out. I would have been in a puddle. It's me embracing and owning the fact that a thing that someone can shame me over or a gift that was allowing me to know what was coming ahead. Yeah. It's not a bad thing. It's not a poisonous thing. It's not something that I did wrong or didn't harness right. It's just what happened. And if I could go back and make different decisions, would I? I'm not even going to allow myself to explore that thought process anymore because that's already been done. And that price has been paid. And then I'm just re-sowing and re-pouring into and manifesting this monster that it's not. It's just a scar. So that's what I mean by the how. It's me addressing that and working through that and knowing that some days are going to be harder and some will be easier. And that when I'm looking at my daughter, I am not leading her through that lens. I'm age appropriately informing her and telling her the story and how she can deal with it and checking myself as moments come that I'm not revisiting a trauma on this situation.
What does it mean to be a Black mother with an innate spiritual awareness in a culture that's becoming more and more hostile to women of color? Courtney Keyser is an innately gifted dreamer, navigating intergenerational trauma and radical healing and self-care. If this episode is resonating with you or maybe reminds you of someone you know, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and share. All right, back to the show.
When we spoke earlier, another example, there was a situation on my mom's side of the family where the family was in the house, and it was set on fire. It was intentionally set on fire. And all the children had to flee. Thank God everybody got out safely. But that's a big trauma. And my mom was a little 2-year-old at the time. But from then on to this day, she has a fear of heights. She does not like to be in confined spaces. She went into a career in law enforcement that required you to always be on and guard your six.
Yeah.
So it led to her, the rest of her life, unconsciously avoiding certain opportunities because they were up too high, or making sure you had a ground floor apartment, or making sure you can always see the exit when you're like, certain things are important. They're life skills.
Wow.
Like, yeah, you should know where your exits are, but like, that's a thing for her. But I didn't have that experience. So I now unconsciously, but it's still a life skill to have in this messed up world we live in.
Absolutely.
I check all my exits. I make sure I know where things are. We have a tagline in my family. We don't do Dateline. Like, we don't do Dateline stories. If we ever end up on Dateline, it won't be the typical interview. So I check in with people know where I'm at. Like, I take pictures of, like, it's hypervigilance.
Yeah.
But we need to understand where their hypervigilance come from, and how in the minute details we are reinforcing, like I said, this trauma that's already been paid for. But we don't know that.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find those things out, like, hey, well, where did this come from? Why do we do this? And then sitting in that with yourself, and then also not punishing the previous generation for what they knew. They did the best with what they knew.
It's so important.
And it doesn't forgive certain choices, but it gives you context. Like, as the goal is to live long, and as we live longer, we go through things and we can look back. And the goal is that you be able to reflect and own your stuff and do things differently. But the other hard thing for me when I was really gung-ho at the beginning of this journey is that I used to get upset that other people weren't as gung-ho as me, or as willing, or saw the value in it. But I realized that they're on their own journey, and this is my journey, and all I can do is work on me, and they'll either follow suit. And I found that a lot have followed suit, and it's just made it easier for me to navigate my life in this gift. But that's what I mean when I say that. So in me owning my trauma and my past, it's allowing me to own my present. It's allowing me to be present. There are plenty of days where I've just cried in my shower and the water ran cold because I needed to cry for that child, or that I gathered the strength to work out for 45 minutes because I really wanted to hurt something. I've
started to taking up kickboxing a few times.
And doing that, I was able to work through and really understand and identify what it is I'm feeling, and that soft emotions weren't celebrated in my family because we had to survive. But like, I'm a soft person. Like, I'm a marshmallow with a chocolate shell. Like, and that's okay. And my dad was just a full-on marshmallow. So like, we got to be able to live in this world and know that that's our power, and it's not a weakness, and that we aren't defenseless out here, and how we can be truly our authentic selves. And, one of the manifestations of my response to my abuse was to be 10 steps ahead, to try to predict whatever I could predict, to armor myself and be ready, to already know what the worst of humanity is, to already be have an affinity to a certain type of people, because at least degenerates, quote unquote degenerates, let you know up front who they are.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful. Like, so that has been the work. And that's the hard part, because some days are easier than others, and some days you will fail at it completely, but at least you're continuing that journey. And I found that certain parts of it have become easier, and embracing that fact.
I guess I'm taking a moment to just to be in my space for everything that you shared. I burned sage before this call. My son's name is Sage in terms of just the the cleansing nature of it and just having it around helps to ground me in a way that a lot of other things don't necessarily. And I noticed too that you have a mist from your end too, that you're also taking the opportunity to ground yourself. There was something, it can be a difficult work to move back into a traumatic space and it's and especially with women of color where gifted women of color too, where it's your trauma, but then also sometimes the trauma of others, the trauma of family members, right? A lot of your gift at work, you picking up on that which is other versus that which is you.
I would get angry. I felt like Snow White. I felt like I was a lighthouse, and I couldn't. I'm a person. I can't not help someone in front of me that I have the toolkit to help. And my issue was I never poured back into me. I never healed me. So I was pouring from an empty well. And you also need to understand when someone is actually asking for help. I was always taught and rewarded for, pardon the euphemism, setting myself on fire to keep others warm. And that's the thing that I always saw all the other women in my life awarded and applauded for. Yeah. And so it just became the thing to do. And then, that plays out in its own way in society. But it was just easy for people to just drop their bags there. And for me, in helping some of them, instead of helping myself, I was helping the me I saw in them. Yeah. And then when you don't get the fulfillment out of that because you're not actually healing you, and this will not even be healing that this person needs, it leads to resentment. Whether you voice it or not. And so by the time I finally lost it, I was very, very obviously visibly pregnant. I was at my job. I'm the leader, the manager there. And I had just walked an employee off the ledge and convinced them to go get help for themselves. And this lady just came in and wailed on me and how her life was just being ruined by this very non-important thing not being done in a timely manner. And further, in my opinion, wasted her time venting about it.
Let's get technical.
And she crossed the line of physical space and touched me, poked me in my chest.
Oh no.
And I was just like, and she felt no qualms about it. And a couple of my friends like, ma'am, she's pregnant. What does that make her special?
I'm sorry. It was on my face just
then. This woman was a Karen. And in that moment, I finally just had enough. And this was going to be, I'm working through the pandemic. Yeah. We don't have vaccines yet. I'm on my feet in a high intensity job, masked for a minimum of 8 to 10 hours a day. Still making sure I'm present and being kind and supporting folks who would just come in and be like, I'm realizing now that life has slowed down, that I'm actually here because I can't deal with what's going on in my home. And counseling people do that willingly because, my silly behind, whatever, glutton for punishment, let me help you. And it just came to a place where it was just like, nah, sis, if you don't stop, you're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die either from early onset heart attack, you're going to give yourself a stroke, you're going to pass out and have a seizure in an unsafe place. Me not dealing with that stuff was physically manifesting through my body, already manifesting a human. So that's what it had to come to for me. And my passion is for people to not have to get to that place, or if they're there, to know that you need to holistically address everything, not just what's going on with you physically. You need to address your mental health. You need to address your spiritual health, whatever you subscribe to believe or not believe. You need to address the dynamics that affect you regularly, the relationship that work picks up with your life, and the people in your life, what are you pouring back into? What do you have for you at the end of the day when all of this is gone?
Yeah.
And you're with your thoughts, or you're at the end of your life and you're with your thoughts.
Yeah, that was, you brought up something, Courtney, that was when the pandemic happened, there were so many people struggling. There was that push with that reminder, everyone take self-care. This is a time for self-care and to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And what I quickly started seeing, similar to the story you just shared, is that, and just speaking as a Black woman, I'm not going to try to speak for other ethnic groups or other groups and how they identify. But there was a lot of the people that I work with professionally were not prepared for me to start taking space for myself. They weren't used to me
they get mad
using the word, right? And they're like, you know how to say you're taking the mental health. That's not supposed to come from you. Oh, yeah.
I can't expect you, the Black woman magic this. I can't throw this on your lap at 5 p.m. on Friday and get it done, have it back to me Saturday morning for it to be turned in on Monday and not give you no credit for it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so that's where it came to. And that's also as I started to work through this stuff, because I hadn't left my job yet. As I'm working through it, and this is people who need to understand what the how, as I'm working through it, like, it's showing up aggressively. It's showing up how it needs to show up, because it's been repressed for 34 years.
Yeah.
And I haven't learned the soft skills because my life hasn't allowed me to understand the nuance of how to have boundaries and how to have these difficult conversations. One of the things that I was prided for at work is that I was unafraid to say what needed to be said in a way that was eloquent and respectful and appropriate, but I was able to say it. And I'm like,
you speak so well.
Everybody else is operating out of fear. And I'm like, well, if we're going to operate out of fear anyway and still deal with these messed up circumstances, why not take the risk of being honest and see what happens? I'm still going to be punished anyway. But when you are the only person doing that and you're only getting the high fives in the hallway and the emails after the meeting and the texts after that, no one's outwardly doing it, that's when you fall into the trope. That's when it becomes a problem. And for me, I was tired of that. I am giving this job and these people everything, and I've taught them how to love me. I've taught them that my reward is their half-assed validation. I've taught them that my body does not have value in my actions. Like, this goes across my life. That trauma, that sexual trauma of my childhood told me that I had to overcompensate. Being a Black woman, coming out of Baltimore City schools, going into first grade and being one of 3 other Black children in an all-white school, that was its own thing to navigate. Being told that I'm too Black for certain spaces and I'm too white for spaces with my family because of how I carry myself and speak, and my interests just because of where I happen to go to school and live. But then also being a problem because my mom never let me forget where I came from. She informed me without supervision. So it's important that children know their history, but as parents, you need to supervise that.
Can we speak about that? Can we speak about
context? Giving a 10-year-old, and I'm not bashing her because I'm grateful I had the knowledge, but reading 100 Years of Lynching at 10 years old, and if anyone has ever read 100 Years of Lynching, it's literally just the actual articles from the time of all of those crimes. And not having context for that, and then her not understanding the environment that I was going into and the microaggressions that I dealt with from children and their parents and my teachers, and then also from my family, because I haven't learned, there's no term called code switching yet, and I haven't learned that that's what I need to do yet. And even my family's justification, well, we do it first so that when you get out into the world, they can't hurt you. That's a whole nother conversation. But it left me in a place of just being confused and not really being able to truly own what my emotions were, how they present, or even identify them. That the
Yeah.
thing that shows up for me as anger is really just sadness, because I've realized in now having boundaries that so many people don't respect me, and that makes me sad. They
Yeah.
think they respect me,
Yeah.
but they don't actually respect me. And if they looked at their actions and took their needs or wants out of it and put themselves in my place, they wouldn't do those things. And for me, being an empath and being a sexual abuse survivor, I always overcompensate because I have learned to not trust that people love me for me.
Yes.
So I will go over my way and say, I will make the consideration that I'm not going to call so and so because they're probably home with their family right now. I'm going to figure it out and then I'll hit them up on Monday. They're not even thinking that way when it comes to me, because I just get stuff done and they need it done right now.
Yeah.
So in me starting to stand up for that and then getting disappointed and hurt along the way and owning that and figuring out, is this a person I can even have a genuine conversation about this with, and they're going to respect me and do what needs to be done. That's what I went through. And I found out that most of them, truthfully, no, they did not hold respect for me in the way that I consider respect. Or compassion for me in the way that I consider compassion for them. And owning and forgiving myself, that's the process I am in right now, of forgiving myself for teaching them that that was okay. Because I was always taught that you got to play the game, and you can only show up a certain way as a Black woman in these spaces and be successful. And it just came to a head where at this point, the situation was so far gone that I could not continue to do that work in that situation and be successful. So that's why I say I know my privilege in being able to be home right now. Doesn't make it any easier. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and it's hard being a mom, period. Stay at home and working.
It is the most real stuff. Let me just, I don't even know.
On top of going on this journey, but like, it's easier than that, because at the end of the day, that's pouring into me. I see the fruits of that. It's not stripping anything else away from me. So that was the hard thing. It was like, okay, how do I figure out how to navigate that? Constantly being present with myself and checking myself that I wasn't blowing up situations and that I was intentional and purposeful with my time. It slowly started with me like being like, no, I'm off the clock. I read the employee handbook. I'm off the clock right now. You need to contact this person. It started with the enforcing of, I am working to live and not living for work, and what that really means. And knowing that there's very few people in this world where they get to walk in their purpose and passion, and it aligns with how they actually sustain their lives, and that it's okay. And even further with therapy being like, you got to do whatever works for you as long as it's not hurting you or nobody else. Your self-care could be going to get a mani-pedi. Your self-care could be on Fridays, I drink responsibly. Your self-care could be, I'm going to just zone out, put some anime and knit. It could be something else in the club.
Both of those at the same time.
It could be any of those things, and that's really okay. And it's okay. Nobody can yuck your yum. Like, it's okay, whatever you need to do to live in this world, not survive, but live. You gotta fight to be able to do that.
Whenever I would come either within my dreamings or my meditations, just to a space that was really dark and scary, where I wasn't really sure I wanted to go to resolve what spirit was trying to move me through resolving. The question that it was to me was, spirit would say, we get that it's scary. You don't really know if you want to go here, but would you do it if this is what you needed to walk through for the sake of your child? And then like a drop of a hat, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I just moved through all these difficult lessons and spaces. And where we started slowing down was when spirit tripped me up. And I was moving through a very difficult space and energy. It was like a death energy, about the idea of of needing to move through
Mm-hmm.
something I wasn't looking at in terms of my subconscious that was around death and dying. And Spirit was like, okay, would you do this if you had to do this for the sake of your child? And I was like, okay, yeah, absolutely. And Spirit goes, that's great. So what if you had to do it for her? And then it was dream. And I looked in the dream and it was me in the mirror. And everything in me visibly pulled back and cringed. And Spirit said, that's the problem.
Yep.
That's the problem.
Yep.
Is that you would do all of this for like your child,
Anybody
and your
else.
parents, and your ancestors, and your community, but you don't understand how much we love this person in the mirror, and how much work it has taken to get your heart and your energy and you here, and what you manifest. So let's reconcile what you need to do for her to thrive and for you not just to survive. So it's just, I don't even have the words for it because it's more of like the energy.
We've been examining how our elders have been negatively impacted by a lack of resources that address their spiritual needs, and how our generation is battling to let go of the intergenerational trauma that affects us, and by extension, our children. How do we find a way to thrive rather than just survive? Is there some part of you that you value less than the people around you? However we choose to move forward, simply having the courage and fortitude to make a move may make all the difference.